More than the shyness, salespeople are scared to ask for the sale. In my experience, 95% of the sales professionals, they tell and they don't sell. And hence, they are not actually professionals, they are the salespeople. So salespeople usually will talk about all the features, all the benefits of a particular product, and then expect that you make an educated decision. Why do they do that? Why do they tell? Why don't they sell? It's because, one, when they join an organization, they get the product knowledge, they get knowledge about all the features and everything. Now they feel that once I have grasped all that knowledge, I am much more superior than the customer, because the customer does not know some of these interesting facts. So when they're interacting with the customer, they feel that the moment I share all of this, I appear to be knowledgeable, I appear to be superior. That is one. Second is, they are not educated on the skills of selling. So what are the skills of selling? One is knowing about the product knowledge, knowing about the process, that is definitely there. But also looking at the market knowledge, also looking at the competition knowledge. What are the kind of offers that they have come up with? Okay? How is the market progressing in a specific way? That is also essential. And then comes the more critical element, which is selling skills. So this is where communication skills, presentation skills, negotiation skills, assertiveness, all of these things come in picture. Because you may have the best of the product, but if you're not able to sell that product, if you're not able to convince or influence someone's decision, then the business is not going to make money. The business survives on selling. The business survives on profits. And to do all of that, there needs to be time management, organizing and planning skills also, which are very important. So when a salesperson embarks on a journey of constantly enhancing their skills, constantly enhancing their knowledge, then they become more confident. The secret of selling lies in the pull approach rather than the push approach. So a professional salesperson would always allow the customer to speak more than him, okay? Him or her. 70% and 30%, that's the kind of ratio that we are looking at, where 70% of the time the customer talks, 30% of the time the salesperson talks. Okay? And it is much more effective for a salesperson to ask the relevant questions, gain the knowledge from the customer, and then pitch for the product at the end. Most leaders, they only track how many sales are being done in a particular month, and they track what is the value of those sales. Because this is like the bottom line for any organization. Any organization or business only looks for what is the net profit, what is the gross profit, okay? And that's what most leaders track. But instead of focusing on the results, the focus should be on the efficiency of the sales funnel. Now, there are two very important points which I'm going to talk about in a sales funnel. The first and the foremost is that there should not be just one sales funnel. There should be multiple sales funnels. Why multiple? Because it is every single sales funnel should be for every category of the customer, or for any location specific, or for any segment specific. So that is the first and the most important thing. Customer categorization should be a part of the sales funnel, and there should be separate sales funnels for every single customer category, for every single location. The second most important point is, what are the aspects or what are the elements that should be a part of sales funnel? Now, for most people, the sales funnel starts with the calls or the first cold email. But professional salesperson know that the sales funnel starts much before it. The first step for a sales funnel is planning, prioritizing. Once that is done, then the approach should be planned as to, should this be a personal visit? Should it be a call? Should it be an email? And then onwards, from your calls and appointments, how are you able to fix the right appointments? From there, the meetings. From there to proposals. From there to the stages of negotiation. From there to the close. And the sales funnel does not just end over there. From the close, it goes to cross-selling and upselling, and then referrals, and then the repeat purchase by the customers. So when you look at a sales funnel, there are so many different aspects and so many different parameters to be measured. It is not just about the value of the sales or what is the final count or what is the final figure. And we should be looking at how to maximize our efficiency in the entire sales funnel. If we look at human evolution was possible because we adapted to change. We are not the strongest of the creatures on this planet, but we adapted to change. And today we are amongst the top of the food chain just because the way we adapted. I think sales is also evolving. If you look at maybe a couple of decades earlier, the companies who started selling something, they had a monopoly. Okay. They came up with a unique product and they had a monopoly. At that point of time, when the customers were interested to buy that product or service, they would stand in long queues just to get that product or service. I remember there were telephone companies who would have a waiting period of 6 to 8 months to deliver one phone connection. And people would be so excited and people would be constantly following up for their connection. Things have changed. In the last couple of decades, things have completely changed. But I want you to think, like a couple of decades ago, when this was the situation, when there was a waiting period of 6 to 8 months, think of the salesperson. Think of the mentality of the salesperson. The salesperson would be sitting, just chilling and waiting for the customers to come. Today, that scenario has completely changed. Today, the salesperson has to go to customer, convince and influence to buy their product or service. Why this has happened? It is because the monopoly which existed earlier is not there. The competition is increasing. Earlier, customers had the source of knowledge, which was the salesperson. So if they wanted any kind of knowledge, if they wanted any kind of information, they had to get in touch with the salesperson. Today, all that knowledge, all that information is available on fingertips because of internet. Customers are becoming smarter. The customers know sometimes much more than the sales professional. And the competition is ever increasing. Customers' expectations from the organization, from the salesperson, from the product, from the service are also constantly increasing. In this stage, it is a do or die. And that is the only motivation which is needed for a sales professional. I'll give an example. In 1917, Forbes magazine decided to publish a list of the top 100 organizations existing at that time. So these were the world's top 100. Today we call them the Fortune 100 companies. So that list was published in 1917. After a span of 70 years, in 1987, again a list of the top 100 companies was published. Very strangely and very surprisingly, only 18 companies from the first list existed in the second list. What happened to the others? 21 companies survived, but they were not present in the list. And 61 companies out of those 100 wiped off, non-existent. Think, if this can happen to the top 100 companies of the world, it can happen to anybody. The result was only because of not changing. So this should be an enough motivation for us to know that we constantly need to adapt, constantly need to enhance our skill sets, our knowledge. Change is the only constant. If you consider a machinery in a manufacturing plant, the output is not just dependent upon the amount of raw material which goes inside. If you want to change the result, if you want to change the production capacity, it is not just about the raw materials, but it is also about the efficiency of a machinery. The sales funnel is that machinery. So I have seen that most salespeople, they say, if you want to increase the output, then you need to make more calls, then you need to send across more emails. But that is not the only reason, or that is not the only way to go ahead and improve the efficiency of the funnel. Now, if you want to change the result by 100%, You don't change one thing by 100%. Rather, you make 1% change to 100 things. It is much easier, it is much faster, and it will improve the efficiency drastically. So just think, in a sales funnel, if you're looking at the number of calls, if you even have one extra call in a day, towards the end of the year, even if you consider weekends and you consider public holidays and everything, you would be at least making 200 calls in a year. So all you did was make one extra call a day. So instead of just focusing saying that I need to make 1,000 calls, I need to make 100 calls in one day, instead of that, look at what you're doing and just increase the efficiency by 1% of each of that stage. Think about even the telecalling scripts that you would be probably using. So how can you change the telecalling script? How can you make it more attractive? So instead of going ahead and saying, I need to make 200 calls now, you look at what are you currently doing and how can you maximize the efficiency of that as well. Look at how can you implement changes in your body language. How can you learn about neuro-linguistic programming? Because when you are going ahead and conducting meetings, look at if there are 10 meetings conducted, how many are successful? Now, if you want to increase that kind of percentage from the number of meetings conducted to the number of successful meetings, look at how can you build faster rapport? How can you use neuro-linguistic programming elements over there? And how can you gauge body language? How can you project body language effectively? And make that rapport building faster, stronger, and that will help you to convert your meeting into a successful meeting. So only looking at raw materials input is not essential. Look at the efficiency. Look at every single ratio. So from calls to appointments, from appointments to proposals, from proposals to negotiation, from negotiation to close. Look at every single aspect of the sales cycle, of the sales funnel. And then your output is going to increase drastically. You may not always be a better negotiator, but you can always outplan the best of negotiators. Planning is extremely important, and it is the most underrated thing in a negotiation. Imagine that if you are a commander of a military unit and you get an information from the headquarters saying that there are terrorists over there, you're not going to jump over there, you're not just going to go and barge in over there. What you're going to do is probably send one or two of your soldiers up over there to check how many people are there, what is the ammunition that they are carrying, at what terrain they are. Okay. So you're going to do a lot of research before you plan for an attack. The same thing is also applicable in a negotiation. So what all things should you plan for? There are two things. One is strategic planning and one is operational planning. So let's look at a strategic planning. When you look at a strategic planning, when you are sitting in for a negotiation, obviously you have your needs and then you have your wants. So classifying your needs, which we call it as LDO, that is the least desirable option, and then MDO, which is the most desirable option. There are a lot of sales professionals that I have seen who do not have these objectives set, and they go in for a negotiation thinking, let's see what happens over there. But that is a disastrous way of going in for a negotiation. You should look at what is your LDO, what is your MDO. The moment you have these objectives in mind, that classifies your win. So when you sit in for a negotiation, if you are able to achieve that particular result, then you are winning. So that is the first thing to do. The second is understanding what could be the LDO and MDO of the party that you are negotiating with. Once you have the LDO and MDO of both the parties, then you would be identifying the ZOPA, that is called as Zone of Potential Agreement. If there is no ZOPA, then there cannot be a win-win negotiation. Then you should be also looking at variables. So there are different variables. Price is not the only objective for negotiating. There could be hundreds of different things which can influence that decision. So those elements are called as variables. Just to give you a small example about variables, it could be like payment terms, it could be the credit limit, It could be what time certain product needs to be delivered, or the color of the product, or anything of that sort. So all of these are variables. The variables which are of utmost importance for the other party or for you are called game changers. So figuring out what are the game changers, then you should look at how do you perceive the relationship. Do you want this relationship to go on as a long-term relationship, or you're considering this as a one-off deal or a short-term relationship? Because based on that, your approach would change. Thinking of what could be the potential disagreement areas and what kind of strategies would you have to encounter these kind of disagreement areas is something that you should be looking at. But that's from the strategic perspective. From the operational perspective, there is micro planning which is required. So what is the kind of attire that you would wear for sitting for a negotiation? Okay. Can you use some of their brand colors? Okay. So maybe the brush that you are using, or the pen that you are using, can it be matching to their brand color? This is micro planning. You can look at what is the time of the day for that particular negotiation to happen. So you can actually plan that, or how the seating should be. Just to give you a small example, if the seating is usually it is across, then it means that you are looking at as an opponent. Okay. This is something which happens in the subconscious mind, because there is a table in between. There is one person over here, there is one person over here, which means you are like an opponent, like most of the sports. So instead of that, let the seating be L-shaped, okay, which means you are looking at joining together and at a common direction. So these are some of the operational planning strategies which you can use in a negotiation. So both strategic planning and operational planning, both are essential. Personal ethics play a very important part in all the negotiations. But there is a mistake which a lot of negotiators do. Personal ethics should not be placed right up front. They should be placed at the bottom. Let me explain this. So I'll give you an example first to talk about how ethics play a role. Imagine that you are a dealer of electronic machinery which is used in automobile manufacturing. Imagine that you are selling one particular machinery which costs, let's say, $15,000. Now this machinery is huge in size, and there are dealers. There are other dealers also who are operating in the same kind of in the same territory. But this particular machine is such that it is so huge, people do not order it and keep it in stock. So whenever any organization requires this particular machinery, this machinery is ordered from abroad and then it comes over here. It takes about 2 weeks time to deliver this particular machinery. Let's consider the name of this machinery as Automo. So imagine you are a dealer, you are supplying this particular machinery, it is costing $15,000, and that your selling price is $20,000. So you make a profit of $5,000. Now imagine that there is an automobile manufacturing company who had a failure in their manufacturing plant. They need this machinery immediately, urgently. If they wait for 15 days for the machinery to get delivered, they are going to face a loss of $500,000. No one, not even one single dealer in that particular region has that particular machinery right now. You, on the other hand, had placed an order for another customer, and that machinery arrived today. So you are the only one who has this particular machinery. The customer who had ordered that particular machinery does not require it for 2 more months. So you can safely give it to this particular automobile manufacturing company. The question is, how much would you charge? How much would you charge? Would you only charge 15,000? Would you only charge 20,000? Would you charge 100,000? Would you charge 200,000? How much would you charge? When I have asked this particular question in all my training sessions, I get different answers. Some people say that I will not give this machinery to this new customer. I will give it to the same customer because he is the customer who had ordered that machinery. This is governed by personal ethics. Someone could say that I will sell it for 20,000 because that's the usual market selling price. and that's what I will sell. I will not charge anything more. I will not take advantage of the situation. Sure, that's a personal choice as well. But there are some people who would say that if their loss is 500,000, I can charge 400,000 and they will give. That is also a personal choice. Now, all these answers, there is no right and there is no wrong. There is no right, there is no wrong. It is all governed by your personal ethics. So, how important are ethics in negotiation? I think very important. But there are steps to it. The first step is whenever you are going to enter a particular negotiation, that time, think of that particular scenario in all the practical sense. Think of what can you ask for? What can you ask for? Then you look at your personal ethics, then you look at your emotions coming in picture, and then you decide what should you ask for. So what can you ask for and what should you ask for? These are two different elements. Ethics in negotiation come at the second part, not at the first part. So if you want to be successful in negotiations, make sure that you don't look at ethics right in the beginning. Keep it aside just for a moment, think through it in a practical scenario, and then apply your ethics and emotions. That is going to make you a powerful negotiator. Win-win outcome is something which is expected out of people, but it is rarely being followed. Let me give you an example. So, a person who's sitting in for a negotiation usually is so obsessed with their own wants that they forget to identify the needs of the other party. When you're looking at a win-win kind of outcome, the focus should not be just on your wants. The focus should be on meeting their needs as well. And not just their needs. If you're looking out for a long-term relationship, then you start thinking of what is the maximum value that you can add also. Not just looking at what can you get from them. So a win-win is more of giving and getting. So that is a give-get principle which gets applied for a win-win. A couple of pointers over here is that don't jump into a price. Build rapport and ask a lot of questions. One of the mistakes which people do is they directly start jumping into the price and they hold their ground. And that's it. Saying that this is the price, otherwise I will walk away. So instead of that, don't jump into the price. Take time, build rapport with them, build a relationship with them. Ask relevant kind of questions to understand what is important for them. Try to gauge what their needs are. The other party will not just come up and say that, okay, this is what I need. They are going to also try and figure out if they can achieve their wants. People talk about wants. People don't talk about needs. So through effective questioning, try to find out what their needs are. If you're able to do that, then you will be able to understand what is the ZOPA, which is the zone of potential agreement, and then try to maximize the win for them and for you as well. Second is be flexible. Don't take a stand. Okay. I know there are so many negotiators who like to take a stand and say that, okay, if you don't give me this, I'm walking out. Instead of that, try to be flexible. Soften your approach. The moment you soften your approach, you are inviting a dialogue. If you invite a dialogue, you're maximizing the chances of prolonging that communication and making sure that both are in a win-win kind of position. Be truthful too. Okay. Lies can be very risky. So win-win negotiations are based on trust. Once the trust is broken, it is very difficult to build that trust back. Okay. Then you would be always eyed with suspicion. So make sure that you be truthful. Don't lie about certain things. How much should you reveal? That depends upon you. But be truthful. Don't lie about certain things. Figure out all the variables before you start negotiating and before you start putting in a price. The reason being is that if you say about a particular price and then they say that, okay, I'm also looking out for this and I'm also looking out for that, then your price would change. So before you get into the price discussions, look at what are the important elements which are important for the other party and for you as well. And once all those variables are spread across on the table, then you start proposing the price points. Other very important thing is mirroring and matching. I think this is one of the most underrated thing for building rapport. So when you want to build rapport, you start mirroring and matching the body language, mirror and match the words. This is an NLP technique for building subconscious rapport. And you would be surprised, it works like magic. So try to learn more about it. Okay? Learn about body language, invest time in discovering body language techniques and implement them. Because once you start building rapport, you're automatically saying that we are looking at a win-win. Let them know that you are thinking of their objectives. Let them know that you are thinking about their win and not just your win. Cold calls can be very tricky and can be very exciting too. Imagine you are interacting with a stranger, and if you are able to build credibility, trust, rapport, and then influence the thinking all through a call, how exciting it is. But to understand the key elements of a successful cold call, we first need to understand as to what are the elements because of which the cold call fails. So the first element is calling without research. I mean, imagine if you are going to call an HR head of a company. I'm sure you would agree with me if I say that if I'm starting the call like this, saying that I would like to connect to XYZ. This is a very important call. Instead of, can I please speak to the HR head of the company? So you would see that in both these calls, the opening itself has to be very dynamic, has to be very powerful, and you don't need to give out any kind of escape mechanism. The moment you say, can I please speak to the HR head of the organization? There itself, there is an escape route. If there is a gatekeeper involved, the gatekeeper is going to ask, may I know who's calling? May I know what is it regarding? And then only if the gatekeeper feels that the call is feasible, the call would be passed on. However, if the opening is very dynamic, very powerful, saying, okay, this is a very important call, I need to speak to so-and-so. That itself is a very authoritative call. And the chances of bypassing the gatekeeper increase. So when you look at a cold call, there are several different elements which need to be practiced to make it very successful. The second is, there are a lot of salespeople who try to sell the entire product over the call. Okay? They feel that this would be much faster. The key element over here is not to sell the product or service, but to sell an appointment. To sell an appointment. Okay? So all you have to do is give them something which is very intriguing, because of which they would want you to meet. And that's where in the meeting, you would do a detailed need analysis, and that's where you would sell. So this is a part of the entire sales cycle. So this is one of the mistakes which people do, is they try to sell the entire product or the service over the call itself, just because they have got hold of the customer. And that is a unprofessional way of selling in a cold call. And the last important thing is, your prospect, if you are calling your prospect or your potential customer, there are hundreds of other salespeople from different companies, from your competition, who are also trying to reach. The biggest mistake that people would do is be like everyone else. That's the biggest mistake. You need to stand out. You need to be unique. If you are unique, you would be remembered. If you are not unique, you are one amongst the 100, and then you lose your value. So these are the three key elements of succeeding in a cold call. One is call with research, know the name of the person, know the designation of that particular person, do adequate research about the company, and then speak. Second, don't try to sell the product, sell the appointment. And the third is, don't be like everyone else, be unique. You can't look out for diamonds in an apple tree, and neither can you look out for apples in coal mines, unless you know that someone has kept it over there deliberately. Planning is the most crucial element in cold calling. We must have heard the saying, if you want to cut a tree, sharpen the axe first. Over here, sharpening the axe means doing a research before even shooting out your first email, which is your cold email. Identify the right stakeholder. Now, I know that there are some sales professionals who would say that if you are operating in a B2C kind of segment, where your product is generic, where your product can appeal to any person. Over there, you might consider sending across a cold email without even identifying the right stakeholder because it might appeal to them. But if you're looking at a B2B scenario, every single impression counts. Sending it to a wrong person can indicate that there is no time which is spent on doing some homework about the organization, which also signifies that it is not as important. And in this particular thinking that someone does not value me would also not give across business. There would not be any reply. Hence, personalization is very important in any single cold email that you are going to send. I know that you might say that if I send at least 100 emails, there will be 2 people who would reply and that this is a percentage game. In B2B, it is not so. In B2B, the moment you make your first impression, you stand to win or you stand to lose. If you stand to lose, then the customer is not going to view you in the same light as they would view your competitors. Hence, be very specific, spend some time, sharpen your axe, okay, and then you go ahead and cut the trick. There are so many different stealth techniques for increasing the readability of email. Today, an average person gets at least 10 to 20 cold emails. And how to make sure that your email stands out, it gets opened and it gets read. Because only if that the email is read, there would be a chance of some kind of action. And that's where your product or service has a chance of being sold. So you'll have to deploy different strategies to make sure that your email gets opened first. So the first element over here is the timing of the email. Make sure that you do not send across emails maybe on month ends or the first working day of the week, because these are the times when people are extremely occupied, extremely busy, and the chances that they would skip your email. During the month ends, people have targets, and no one would want to go ahead and shift their attention into reading something which is not going to help them at that particular point. So during the month end, please do not send across promotional emails. Look at maybe the first week, and that's the key day to send across any email which is promotional in nature. Also look at the work timings. If you are sending across an email right at maybe 8 in the morning or 9 in the morning, people who come in over there, they might have certain meetings lined up, they might have their day planned, and if they are seeing a promotional email, the chances are that they will say that, okay, I will read it later, and that later never comes. So make sure that your timing is accurate, that you are doing your research about your customer segment. The second is the subject line. So make sure that the subject line of your email is something which is short and there is a marketing hook. Some of the examples would be quick question. Now, the moment you see that as a subject line, quick question, it is very intriguing. So what is this question? And they would open your email. Or if you say must see or say last chance, these are the kind of subject lines that you would be looking at. Then you could look at NLP elements. So now once the email is opened, people learn in different ways. There are people who are visual, there are people who are auditory, and there are people who are kinesthetic. These are NLP elements. People learn differently. So people learn by seeing, people learn by hearing, and people learn by doing. How can you incorporate those words in your email is something that you should also be looking at. Another thing is, please make sure that you do a lot of research about the organization or about customer that you are sending across the email to. Go through their website, look at what are their growth plans, and look at if your product and service could help them to achieve their growth plan. If you are putting in these answers in that email, that is definitely going to brighten their eyes and they are going to start thinking, okay, how can this happen? And that intrigue is going to make sure that they reply to your email.